tonight, oh, I don't know if it started. Hey guys, so tonight we're going to be talking about considerations for runners in their twilight years or considerations for older runners. I can't see my stuff. There it is. Before we get to that, let's get a beer. So, tonight I'm quite excited about this one because it's from... We were driving through Olds on the way back. We went to Kananaskis today for a hike, which was really nice. And we were driving through Olds on the way back, and we know that at the college there, they have like a brewery school thing, and they have like a little shop thing where you can go and get the beer that they make in that brewery in the college. And this one is from... what's his name? Nathan Champagne, and he was a student, right? So at the end of their final year, they make beer and then they make a bottle and they sell it in the shop. I was like, oh man, that's so cool. And they had a bunch of different bottles of different students over the years, and this one we had a sample and it was really good. And yeah, I thought that was really cool. So it's called the Student Craft Beer Series, and this one's called Welcome to the Party Pal. And well, I guess it's from Olds College Brewery. So I really like dark beers, so I'm kind of glad winter is coming back. So it's socially acceptable to drink dark beer again. All right. Oh man, that's awesome. It's like a chocolatey. Anyway, so this week's question comes from Steve, who wants to know more about running in the twilight years, or running considerations for older athletes, specifically people getting into run. Now, I'll read out his question because I think it'll give it good context, and I'm going to kind of go through it. So, Steve says, I started endurance running at age 58. I'm now 65 and run 8 to 10 full marathons and 10 to 15 half marathons annually, plus a host of shorter distances with my kids and grandkids. As I was ramping up, I don't recall seeing much guidance on considerations that more seasoned individuals should factor in versus the younger crowd. I know I went down the minimalist track and paid dearly for it with shin splints and with shin and knee issues. Full cushion for this senior. Also, Fartleks and aggressive hill repeats can be injury prone too, and I think proper cadence is even more critical to lessen impact stress. It would be great to encourage more participation in the 50 plus crowd that exclaim, oh my knees are too bad, or use some other excuse that are really euphemisms for fear and lack of knowledge of how to add running to their regimen safely. All the best, Steve. So, thank you for the question, Steve. And I got a lot of questions this week, so big thanks to everybody who put them in. And yeah, I can only tackle one at a time because I just blabber on so much. But I was super excited when I got this one because it's a lot of stuff that I'm really passionate about talking about. So that'll probably come across. And yeah, it's just running and then sort of staying fit and healthy as we age are two big interests of mine. So this one went straight to the top of the list. So thank you, Steve. So what I've done for tonight is I have linked in the description a video from another. It's kind of a podcast. It's a Facebook Live thing called Runchatlive. It's a bit like this, but way better and good. So you should probably just go and click that and watch that. It's much better than this. But I would check it out, especially if you're I don't know, what do we call old, really? I mean, old used to be 45 when life expectancy was much lower, right? It's obviously not now. So I'm going to kind of say, the old athlete or the senior athlete. I'm more thinking retirement plus, whatever that means. Do you know what I mean? And yeah, hopefully I don't, I don't know how to define older, right? It's older than what, right? I'm older than I was when I was 20. I don't know. I guess considerations as we age is the way we're going to look at it. But it's hard to divide up older runners from younger runners. Like, where do you draw that line? I'm not sure, but I'm more thinking definitely 50 plus. But I certainly wouldn't consider 53 an old age, right? So my apologies if it comes across that way. Anyway, in that episode of Runchatlive, they have Dr. Rich Willy on, who's an excellent researcher in the running field, and he's a physical therapist from the US, and he gives way better advice than I'm going to now. I'm going to give my perspective, but what he talks about is really, really smart, and I would definitely recommend you check it out. If you find what I talk about tonight at all interesting, you'll find that like way more interesting and way more helpful. So anyway, I listened to that podcast again when I got this question because I remembered it, and I think I'd actually listened to it twice before in the past. So it's really good, and I took some notes down, some statistics that Dr. Willy shared that I really liked. And this first one actually isn't from him. It's one I learned from a study a few years ago that I really took to heart and have shared with a lot of people over the years. That we lose muscle mass as we age, somewhere in the order of about 1% per year over the age of 30. Now, it's not quite that, it's a bit less than that, but it's easy to remember if you're thinking about that. So I'm 36, I think. Maybe I'm 35, I'm pretty sure I'm 36. So that means I've lost 6% of my muscle mass already, like statistically speaking. Maybe that's not factually true, but it's likely, right, given the statistics. So the average person will lose 1% of muscle mass per year over the age of 30, right? That means by the time you're 50, you've lost 20% of the muscle mass that you had when you were 30. By the time you're 60, you've lost 30% of your muscle mass. I mean, that's just a huge amount. And this isn't to say that is what happens. That is what will happen to you personally if you're watching this. It's to say that's what happens to the average person. So there's a mixture of genetic and age-related change and behavioral change, right? So if you're sedentary up to the age of 30 and then you take up triathlon and start lifting heavy weights, your muscle mass might actually be 110%, in your 50s, what it was in your 30s. So this is an average, but it shows a trend towards people losing muscle mass at a pretty steady and alarming rate once they get over the age of 30. So I guess we'll classify 30 as old, right? And that includes me, so now I don't feel weird about saying it. So we're all older athletes when it comes to this stuff, and everybody under 30 is young. Okay, I'm glad I cleared that one up. So this is more from Dr. Willy in his podcast with Matt. Sorry, I've forgotten Matt. I've forgotten your first name. The guy who hosts the Runchatlive podcast, which is wonderful. VO2 max declines 7% per decade, which accounts for a decrease in running performance. So your finishing times obviously go down as you age, and that's about 8% a decade, which kind of goes in line with VO2 max, which isn't an exact predictor of performance, but is a very close correlate of performance. Max heart rate declines 1 beat per year after the age of 20, and so that's where the old 220 minus your age for your max heart rate, right? So that my max heart rate estimate would be, oh man, I put myself on the spot there, 84, 184. But that's an estimate, right? But it's not actually that bad an estimate, 220 minus your age. And that, like, as you get older, your max heart rate potential goes down, yeah, about 1 beat a year, right? So that's where that 220 minus your age comes from. You get more muscle mass loss and tendon stiffness loss in the calf than elsewhere. So I got that from Dr. Willy, and I think that's true. And I think you can almost see it in older people. You definitely see, like, you see the muscle mass loss. It's sometimes described, especially in the very much the older years, the latter, the last quarter of this century. If a century is a rough estimate of how long a human lives, like the last quarter, they call it frailty, right? It's that extreme loss of muscle bulk, and then at some point it crosses a line, and we see it as frailty, right? It's like this. That's how they describe it in hospitals, particularly in the UK. They say that it's almost like a medical diagnosis, like frailty, and they'll say that in the medical notes in the hospital, right? There's a frail individual or frailty as a condition. Do you know what I mean? Because it has associated problems like fall risk and fracture risk, and actually there's some correlation between muscle strength in your grip and your actual predicted lifespan, right? And that again is, I mean, it's not like they're dying because they can't grip. It's a correlation. Anyway, I got sidetracked there. We lose it in the calf, and that's where we get most of our propulsion from our calf. I actually got that from one of Dr. Willy's studies. We get, I think, about 50% of our propulsion or absorption when we're running from the calf. And then, this isn't exact, but it's the way I remember it. It's like 50% from the calf, 30% from the sort of quads and the hamstring, and then 20% upwards, which is like your glutes and your core and stuff like that. And it's like, where the runners often spend their strength training time is like the complete opposite of that. Like they never do calf raises and they do planks every day, you know. So there's a little bit of I think something I try to do is tell every runner I meet about this distribution of where running propulsion comes from in terms of the muscular system, because it's very much from the periphery. It's the further down your leg you go, the more force is being generated by those muscles. The further up to your core you go, the less important the strength and the power is. Anyway, let me have a drink. And that fits with something Dr. Willy talked about, which is 13% reduction in stride length from 20 to 60 years old. And that's, so as you're running, right, as you push off one foot and onto the other, your stride length is like from here to here. And as you get older, that stride length gets shorter, right? So you're running slower, and part of that is that you're not pushing yourself as far with each stride. 13% loss between the ages of 20 and 60. And then on a more hopeful note, an aerobic capacity of a runner in their 80s is double that of a non-runner, right? The aerobic capacity or the fitness of a runner in their 80s is double that of a non-runner. So it's very important to keep running for all sorts of reasons. And we're going to get into not so much that like why running is good tonight. I think actually that might be a nice thing to talk about in another video, like the benefits of running and the benefits of strength training for older adults. But I wanted to answer Steve's questions like specifically. So I'm going to sort of chop it up and go through in little bits and the things he asked and try and answer those as best I'm able. Okay, so at the start he says, I started endurance running at age 58. I'm now 65 and run 8 to 10 full marathons and 10 to 15 half marathons annually, plus a host of shorter distances with my kids and grandkids. And like, that is just badass, Steve. That is awesome. Like 8 to 10 full marathons a year would be way more than the rest of us could usually manage. It's certainly a lot more than I manage. And then he plus another 10 to 15 halves and some shorter ones with your like, that's awesome. So good for you, Steve. That's awesome. I'm going to tell my mom and dad about you, because I've heard the line you quoted, like I'm too old to run, my knees are too sore to run, from my mom and dad before, and it drives me nuts. But I'm their son, so it doesn't matter that I'm a physio who knows about these things. They don't listen to me. But I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to tell them about you. I'm going to quote that to them. And this reminded me of a really cool article I read a few years ago about this couple in Australia. So in 2013, a couple in Australia in their, they were in the 60s. They were in the late 60s. I think they were 65 and 68. They ran one marathon every single day for an entire year until they ran around the whole of the sort of circumference of Australia. Every single day they did a marathon for 365 or 366 days. I can't remember exactly. And then they only ate raw plants because they were like raw vegan diet, I think. And and the woman, Janet Murray Wakalen, was a cancer survivor. So I mean, if that doesn't persuade you that there is a lot more potential, athletic potential in older adults, I don't know. That we think that I don't know what could. So that's Jeanette Murray Wacallan and Alan Murray, if you want to look them up there. It's a really cool story and very inspiring. I told my mum and dad about that, and that didn't help. Okay, so then Steve goes on to say, as I was ramping up, I don't recall seeing much guidance on considerations that more seasoned individuals should factor in versus the younger crowd. I know I went down the minimalist track and paid dearly for it with shin and knee issues, full cushion shoes for this senior. So that's really cool. It sort of brings up some interesting points that I'd like to talk about. But I'm not going to agree entirely with your conclusions here, Steve, but I'll try and explain why, and hopefully that, you know, you can take that under advisement and decide what's best for you. So one thing is that shin pain is actually quite uncommon for older runners. And actually that's because shin pain, or shin splints as it's commonly called, is usually a bone stress injury. So what happens is the periosteum, which is if we've got this sort of bone cross section here, we're talking about the sort of outer layer, the very most superficial layer of bone becomes inflamed. It sort of bulges out, and it's a reaction to stress. It's a reaction to the impact stress of running. And those type of injuries, shin splints particularly, are extremely common among younger athletes, younger runners, and younger athletes of all kinds, like soccer players and stuff. I see it all the time in the clinic. So bone stress injuries are very common in younger people and less common in older people. Not sure exactly why, but that is the case. It's much more common to get what we call muscular tendinous injuries in older athletes. So that's things like muscle strains, tendinopathy or tendinitis. So that's like the muscle becomes a tendon and then inserts into the bone, and the muscular then the muscle and the tendon form the muscular tendinous unit. And the tendon, you can develop something called tendinopathy, in which is when your tendon hurts because it's not strong enough to do its job. And then connective tissue disorders. So the most common is plantar fasciopathy or plantar fasciitis, it's sometimes known as, which is a layer of connective tissue that sort of binds up the bottom of the foot and helps support the arch of the foot. And you know, I mean, a lot of people have heard of that because you get pain on the bottom of your heel. And that's very common in the older runner. So there's more those muscular tendinous issues as opposed to bony issues, which isn't to say that just means on average, right? It doesn't mean that older people don't get trouble with bone stress injuries or bone injuries from running. It just means it's less common. So you said you switched for minimalist shoes, and then you implied that you went back to cushioning. So that sort of, no, sorry, you said you went back to cushioning. So that kind of implies you went from not only zero drop, but sort of minimal cushioning as well, right? So things like the Vibrams, or the who else make them? The Vivo. I've got a pair of those. Now, what happens when you put people in minimalist shoes? When you put them in the lab and you video them, and you video people who are typically wearing cushioned shoes, or let's call them traditional running shoes, and then you put them in minimalist shoes or barefoot, is that there's sort of a subsection who will change the way they run, and then another group that won't. They'll just run in the exact same way. If you take this group that change the way they run, the most common thing they change is their foot strike, or they change a bunch of stuff, but foot strike's definitely one of them. And they'll often change from being a heel striker to being a midfoot or a forefoot striker. And that kind of makes sense. Like if you run without your shoes on, a lot of people will just kind of naturally start landing on the forefoot or the midfoot, because when they hit their heel, it kind of hurts and sends a bit of a jolt up them. Which, you know, we're not going to get into the sort of demonization of heel striking right now, but it does sometimes in some people sort of subconsciously make them land with a forefoot or a midfoot strike. So if you're one of those people, like Steve might be one of those people, what happens then is if we're running, right, and we're coming down like this, and so this is my shin up here, and this is my hand, my foot. So we're coming down on the heel, right? Then the calf doesn't really come into play until this point in the gait cycle, the sort of middle. Okay, if we land on the forefoot, or let's exaggerate, or let's go to the other extreme and go to the forefoot, as your toes hit the floor, the calf muscles on the back of the leg start lowering the heel down to the ground. So they are involved from the moment your foot touches the ground, which is not the case usually, or not very much, when you're landing with your heel first. So then you've just added, let's say your foot's on the ground for a third of a second. Before, the calf was working for about a sixth of a second, let's say. I'm not sure if that's exactly right, but I'm just trying to make my point. So let's say the calf is now gone from working for a sixth of a second every footstep to a third of a second every footstep. And then you multiply that for how many steps you take in an hour, which is about, is it 10,000 roughly an hour for most people? So then you've just doubled the workload on the calf every hour, right? And if we just talked about what, as Dr. Willy said, that the calf is the area where muscle mass seems to be most pronounced in the older athlete. When you switch to a minimalist shoe and you're one of those people who changes their foot strike based on the fact that they changed to a minimalist shoe, you just doubled the workload on a calf and Achilles tendon that were already shrinking with age, right? So that may be a cause to so that's a potential cause of injury to the calf or the tendon, right? Because we're taking a structure that's already getting smaller with age and we're doubling the workload on it. So that might account for the injury trouble. But you said shin and knee. So the shin, I think, is probably going to be shin splints, right? Because that's the most common shin injury. I don't think you would say shin if you were referencing the back of your leg. So if you were complaining of Achilles tendon and calf pain, I would say that's a reasonable way to say that you might have developed that. If it's the shin, then it's more likely to be the impact, right? Because the cushioning has gone away, so the impact's going to go up a little bit. Shin pain tends to develop in association with the amount of footsteps and the degree of the height of the impact peak. And then the knee issue surprises me. The thing that happens is when you switch your running technique based on removing your shoes or switching to a minimalist shoe, it tends to move. You can't remove stress. You can absorb stress over a longer period, which tends to be good, right? That's reducing slamming or impact. Or you can move it from one place to another. So if you've got knee pain and we change your stride so that you're using your calf and foot more, you're going to shunt the stress down away from the knee into the calf and foot. And that's something I do a lot with people with knee pain, right? I increase their cadence. I don't deliberately change their foot strike, but it often changes as we bring it under their center of mass. And then the knee, it gets offloaded, but the foot and the calf get uploaded. That doesn't make sense, but they get loaded more. And then you have to be careful that you don't develop like plantar fasciopathy or Achilles tendon pain or calf pain or calf strain, like a calf tear. But you offload the knee, right? Which is a good thing in someone with knee pain. So I would be curious about that, whether the change to minimalist shoes was the thing that caused the knee pain and the shin pain, right? I'm not saying it didn't. I'm just saying that wouldn't fit with my prediction. The trouble is that I didn't see what you ran like before. I didn't see what you ran like afterwards. And I didn't see your training volume, which is most often the reason people develop injuries, is their training volume has gone up significantly. So there are two really important variables that I don't know. But hopefully I thought if I share my thoughts, the things you could look at your own training volume, and you could potentially look at your own running technique if you have videos, or if you wanted to video yourself now and just see where your foot strike is. Hopefully that'll be informative, and I'm hoping that that's not a problem for you anymore. But I would say if you were having a lot of trouble with minimalist shoes, particularly zero cushion shoes, and then you switch to cushion shoes that were more traditional or maybe even supportive, and you're having less trouble, then that's a good thing, and you should listen to that and then not try and force yourself to go down the minimalist path for a theoretical reason, when you've got real world information there telling you that the shoes that you are currently using are working better for you. Okay, we're going to get the second part of the question now. Okay, so Steve goes on to say, also, fartleks and aggressive hill repeats can be injury prone too, and I think proper cadence is even more critical to lessen impact stress. Yeah, this is a tricky one. Fartleks, it's a lot of hills, and hill repeats is obviously a lot of hills, and you're often in hill repeats, you're going as fast as you can, or you're going pretty fast up the hill. We've talked about, seeing as the calves shrinking. Let's just sort of give a visual sort of representation of it. We're talking about the calves shrinking. Actually, I haven't checked the comments. Okay, I don't think there's any. I don't know. The calf of the older athlete or the older runner is shrinking, right? 1% a year, maybe more, maybe a bit less, from the age of 30. And when you run uphill, the interesting thing about running uphill is obviously your foot is starting in a little bit of dorsiflexion, and then you're having to come up from your heel being a bit lower than your toes. You have to pull up a bit more. And then your next step, you're going to be higher up the hill. So you need to almost like jump up a bit, right? So the demand on the calf, particularly, because of that change in angle of the foot and the fact that you're trying to actually jump up because your next landing surface is higher than the one you're coming off. I don't know the numbers, I should probably, but I know that the calf is going to have to do a hell of a lot more when you're running uphill than it would if you were running on the flat. And we know that people who are older, that's the 30 plus crowd, including me, right? 6% of my muscle mass potentially may have gone. We know that the older people have less muscle mass, particularly in their calf. They have less tendon stiffness in their Achilles tendon, and that's quite important. We often think of stiffness as being a bad thing, but stiffness is like springiness, right? What's the stats? I think it's 30%. When we take a step, about 30% of the propulsive force comes from a recoil, from the springiness in our tendons, right? We're extremely efficient, and obviously as we get older, our tendons get less stiff, so that 30% comes down, right? Because we get less springy in our tendons as we get older because they're less stiff. So we're gonna have to generate more muscular force from the calf to push us up because we're getting less free rebound from the tendons to bounce us up the hill. So that means running up a hill is very hard for the calf of the older athlete, right? Now, then the question is, okay, do we want to expose or protect? Okay, so if we've got an injured calf muscle, let's say someone has recently developed Achilles tendon pain, okay, and they can't barely run at all. Well, we want to protect that tendon, right? Because it's angry and the person can't hardly run at all. So never mind trying to make the running more difficult than it needs to be by running uphill. Let's try and get them running in some semblance of normality, and then we'll get them running uphill maybe, right? So we were in a protective mindset with that scenario. What if we don't have the Achilles tendon injury though? What if you're Steve, sorry Steve, I've forgotten your age exactly, 65, and you have no Achilles tendon problems, you haven't mentioned any, right? But we know as you age, your calf's going to shrink and your tendon's going to become less stiff. Well, okay, maybe we want to expose that tendon to stresses that will force it to adapt. Stresses like hill repeats. But maybe we're just very careful about how we do it, because if we just throw you in at the deep end, so you haven't done hills in 2 years, and then you go in and you sprint, you do hill sprints, right? And you do, let's say, 10 times 30 second, like a hill that takes 30 seconds to get up, and you did 10 of them, right? I mean, that's just an extremely high volume of load to go through the tendon that is completely unaccustomed to that stress. So it would be better to think, okay, well, I'm in a good place right now. My tendon's healthy. My calf is reasonably healthy, but I want to make sure that over the next 10 to 20 years of running, my calf and my tendon, I retain as much stiffness as I can, or potentially build a bit more if I can, which you can do. We'll get to strength training in a sec, but there's some research that shows people who do heavy strength training in their older years can increase tendon stiffness. It was this one, 64% by 14 weeks of resistance training. So it's reasonable to think that hill running will help improve tendon stiffness in the older athlete. And it's also reasonable to think that it will increase muscle mass size because it's demanding so much of the calf, right? The trick is that you have to not get injured while you're doing it, right? Because you're doing something that's very hard for the calf and the Achilles, but you're doing it with a view to make it stronger and more resilient. And that's why we train. That's what training is. We expose our body to things that it can only just about manage. And then the brain thinks, well, bloody hell, that was hard. I'll make that tissue stronger and more resilient so that it doesn't get injured next time this idiot does it, right? So that's what we're doing when we're training, when we're going for our long runs or our zone 3 runs or whatever. It's the same thing. So do we want to avoid, do we want to protect, or do we want to expose? Do we want to train? And then the question becomes, well, what phase am I in, right? If you're working with a physio, they can help guide you, right? If you're having Achilles tendon problems or plantar fascia problems, then you might want to be more in the protect phase, but you would want to take that on a very individual basis. But if you're a healthy runner and you're just, you're 50 plus, well, even 30 plus, right? You're just getting a bit older, and you're thinking, I need to keep my tendon stiff, I need to keep my calf strong. Once a week I'm going to do hills. Once every second week I'm going to do hills. But if I haven't done hills in 2 years, I'm going to start with a very small amount. I'm going to run up a hill slowly 3 times, like really slowly. And then next week I'm going to run up the hill a little bit quicker, right? And then the next week I'll run up a bit quicker. And then I'll add another repetition. And then I'll add another repetition. So you're giving the tendon and the calf time to adapt, because what will happen if you don't is you'll go up, and one of them you'll try and push off and push very hard to get up the hill to your next step, and your calf will go ping, and then you'll have a calf strain and you'll be out for 4 to 8 weeks. Or your Achilles tendon will start hurting in the morning after your hill runs if you go into it too quickly, right? I'd say impact, I've talked about that above. Increasing cadence to lessen the impact stress, normally I'd say, yeah. What I wouldn't say is that it's more important for older athletes. I'd actually say it's less important to reduce impact stress in the older athlete, because the stats tell us that they get less bone stress injuries. And that's not to say that they don't get any, right? You already mentioned shin splints. So for you, it's probably a good idea to reduce impact stress by increasing your cadence, which, I've talked about that in other videos. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole right now, but generally speaking, it does reduce impact stress. And we know you're having bone stress injury problems like shin splints, maybe, probably, it sounds like. This is not medical advice, disclaimer. So it would be reasonable in your situation to increase your cadence, trying to reduce your impact. But it may be that on average, it is for me, on average, I'm less worried about increasing cadence and reducing impact. The older someone gets, the less worried about that I get in the clinic. The younger someone is, the more worried I am about that. The older someone is, the more worried I am that they need to be doing heavy resistance training 1 to 2 times a week, ideally 3, at least in the off season. The younger they are, the less worried I am about that. So it's kind of like a spectrum, right? And that's because of all we've talked about the tendons getting less stiff and the muscles getting smaller and weaker. And the fact that bone stress injuries are less common as we age, and muscular tenderness issues are more common as we age. So we're trying to hedge our bets against the things that are most problematic. So I'm much more big on when I get runners who are I don't know where my age is, but it's kind of, I guess anyone slightly older than me, I think of older. And everyone younger than me is young, and I'm just right. So it's the older someone gets, the more likely I am when they come to the clinic to be whining on at them to be doing strength training. I was doing it like on Friday. I can remember doing it with a runner. And I was selling it on the fact that strength training improves performance, right? Because it does, or it seems to, at least the research suggests it improves running economy. But it also is a good hedge against muscular tenderness problems. And the thing is that it's also a good hedge. We know that heavy resistance training improves bone density. Now, whether that's a protective factor in shin splints is, I don't know. I don't know if people have looked at that, but it's not research I'm familiar with. But I don't know. Just thinking that through, I'm not sure it would. I mean, definitely we know running, which is like a high impact activity, and heavy resistance training both improve bone density, which is extremely important as we age because we know our bone density goes down. I'm sorry, I don't have the statistics or the values, but it goes down progressively as we age. So when someone comes to me with early signs of osteoporosis or something like that, like we're up to the gym and we're lifting weights and I'm trying to sell them on it because it's really good. It's like it just makes the bones more dense. But as I think about it, if bone density is at its highest when we're younger and young people get more shin splints, then maybe shin splints is a separate kind of problem from bone density, right? So yeah, I'm not sure. Like I said, I'm not sure why we get less bone injuries as we age. And I'll have to do a little more reading on that. That's why it's good to do these videos. They make me look stuff up and learn more. Okay, last little bit. Okay, I'm going to have a drink before we do this last one. Man, this is awesome. What was this kid's name? Nathan Champagne of Winnipeg, Manitoba. Thank you, Nathan. I hope you went on to continue making beer because this is awesome. It's like my favorite kind of beer. It's kind of nutty, chocolatey, kind of, it's like Christmas or something. Anyway, this has nothing to do with running. Where are we at? Okay, last bit from Steve. It would be great to encourage more participation in the 50 plus crowd. 50, I should have picked up on that, Steve. You quantified older is over 50. So I'm still in the younger, apparently. But I would say based on the research about muscle mass loss beyond the age of 30, I'm going to draw 30 plus is older, under 30 is younger. Man, I'm so paranoid about accidentally calling people old. I would think, it depends on the definition, I would think of myself as old in certain contexts, and certainly this would be one of them. I think that the guidance I'm trying to relay, I think, because this isn't my stuff, this is stuff that I read and I'm trying to help just kind of propagate, is that, it's 30 plus we need to start thinking about this stuff. We need to start thinking about including resistance training in our life. We need to start thinking about regular cardio exercise. The people who are younger than 30, they can get away with a lot more. They'll establish habits that'll make it harder in their older years, but I don't think that you really see the negative health consequences. I could be wrong, of poor lifestyle choices until you get over 30. Then it starts the sort of chickens come home to roost at that point. So I would say 30 plus is older in the way I'm talking about it, at least. We'll get to this because I think then it's like sometimes people divide up, okay, well, this is for 30 to 60 year olds, but I'm 60 plus, that's real old. It's like as if there's some extra little category where then, these things that I'm discussing don't apply anymore, and that it's almost like your body can't adapt, right? Once you go over 60, you can't get stronger, you can't get fitter, you can't get healthier. You can't take up new things if you haven't done them before. Now, I mean, that's not entirely, that's not the truth across everyone, but it's certainly an attitude that some people have, and I would hope to discourage as far as I'm able to. Okay, sorry. It would be great to encourage more participation in the 50 plus crowd that exclaim, "Oh, my knees are too bad," or some other excuse that are really euphemisms for fear and lack of knowledge of how to add running to their regimen safely. Yep. I think we have, I mean, I alluded to it there, but I think we have a serious problem with fragilizing older people. I don't know where that is a problem, but certainly the places I've lived and grown up, we see, and it definitely gets worse after retirement. We see people who are older than kind of retirement age is on this kind of, I don't know how to phrase it. It's almost as if they can't possibly get better physically. They will get worse, and they can slow it down a bit, but they should be very careful, right? It's like it's almost that that protective kind of attitude that I was saying. We definitely take that to people. I think over the people who've retired, definitely 60 plus, and I think it's not just like people like me talking about them. I think they do it themselves as well. I think we all do it. I think we overprotect in older age. I think that the research bears this out, that people become a lot less physically active. They become a lot more fragility minded, that if they do something too much, they will hurt themselves. If they run too much, they'll hurt. If they take up running, right, they'll hurt themselves, which may be true, but that's also, I got injured loads of times when I took up running, right? That didn't stop me. I don't think it should stop people. Running injury is incredibly common in the first few years of getting into running. So if you get into running in your 70s and you get injured in the first few years, it's not because you're old, it's because you started running recently, right? I'll leave it at that because I don't want to be too controversial, but I do think that we need to, all of us as individuals need to look at the way we approach aging with less of a protective mindset and more of a adaptive mindset, right? And there's a quote. So this is why I had this to hand. This is from Cicero, who, if you don't know, I think he was like a Roman senator or lawyer or something. He was a smart guy, apparently. Smarter than me, but it's good to end with someone who is like way smarter than you, because then you can just like kind of, you could just go out at a high. Okay, so this is what he said about aging. Grant that old age is devoid of strength, none is even expected of it. By law and by custom, men of my age are exempt from those public services which cannot be rendered without body strength. Therefore, we are not only required to do what we cannot perform, but we are not required to do even as much as we can. And I think that sums up far more eloquently what I was just trying to say. And obviously, I don't know when Cicero was alive, around 600 AD, like it was a long time ago. I don't know, I could be way off with that. I do know a little bit about Cicero. I read a book about him a few years ago. It was like a historical fiction book, but I don't remember much of it. My apologies. But I like the way he said that. It sort of sums up my feeling about how we approach getting into things like running or new activities when we're older. And I think it's incredibly important that we try and think about it differently. And I guess this is some of it coming from my like direct personal experience and experience with clients, right? So I see a lot of clients who are hesitant to get into new things and think they're going to hurt themselves. And I think that's a justifiable thing, right? Because if you get into something new, you're more likely to get hurt because you're less adapted to that activity. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it, all right? We're not cars. We don't get progressively worse as we age, right? We can get stronger as we age, or we can be stronger than we were 5 years ago, even though we're 5 years older, right? We can adapt. We don't lose that capacity. So he goes on to say, a little bit later, apparently in the text, "It is our duty, my young friends, to resist old age, to compensate for its defects, to fight against it as we would fight a disease, to adopt a regimen of health, to practice moderate exercise, and to take just enough food and drink to restore our strength." Mic drop. Got it. I'm not saying that as we age, we shouldn't go through, seasons and our behaviors shouldn't change, right? And I think they do, and I think that's normal and not a bad thing. As we age, the capacity of our body to adapt to stress goes down, right? We are far more adaptable as animals when we're in our 20s than when we're in our 80s, right? So if you put a stress on a 20-year-old, they have a very high capacity to adapt to that stress, say the stress is running. If you put that same stress on an 80-year-old, it's harder for their body to adapt, right? It's less able to adapt, okay? But they still have the capacity to adapt, right? So if a 99-year-old sedentary woman starts doing resistance training and cardio, like running, or walking fast and then building up to running, that's appropriate for her current capacity, then her tissues will adapt, become stronger and more resilient, and the following week she'll be able to do a little bit more. And the following week she'll be able to do a little bit more than that. And she hasn't lost the capacity to adapt to stress or to take up activities that she's not accustomed to, but she's lost, she's not as good at it as she was when she was young, right? An ability that you don't control, that sort of adaptive capacity, automatic adaptive capacity of the body has gone down, but it's not gone. It never goes. You can be 120 and you can still adapt, right? If you put stress on your body, it will still adapt. So I feel like I'm rambling a little bit now because, as I say, I do get quite passionate about this particular subject, which is why I wanted to talk about it this week. But I think Cicero said it much better than I did. And that's my rant for this week. Thank you for tuning in. Steve, thank you for your questions. I hope that the answers were helpful. If you have any further comments, please just stick them in. I'll share the link to this video with you, and then if you just stick them in the comment box, I can touch on them later. And thank you to everybody who's been sending questions and sending words of encouragement. That's really nice. Thank you. I appreciate it. And it's I'm enjoying doing these. I don't know what they are, but I'm enjoying them. And then I did want to say as well to everybody who sent in triathlon related questions, if you are wondering why I'm not talking about triathlon much yet, it's more because I didn't know the answers to the questions. And I got a lot of questions like this, which was, I was like, I've got some really, if not interesting, at least passionate thoughts about this, and things I think would be useful to share. And with the triathlon stuff, I'm not sure I'm going to have to approach those questions because I'm certainly more learning triathlon than I am. I don't know loads about it. So I'll come back to that when I figure out how to do it, whether it's getting some help in answering the questions or just doing a lot of research before I answer them. So I will come back to triathlon stuff, but it may be a few weeks as I just kind of get going with the running stuff first. All right. I think I'm going to call it now. I'm going to finish my beer. Thanks. Was it Nathan? Yep, thank you, Nathan. Check that place out if you go see it. It's the Olds College Brewery. All right, good night, everyone.